Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress. Were the old masters stronger than their successors? Was Wilhelm Steinitz, the first world champion, stronger than Magnus Carlsen, the current world champion? Was Mikhail Chigorin stronger than Vasily Smyslov? Well, in 1946 people thought the old masters were indeed stronger than their successors. Let me tell you the story. In 1946 the first important tournament was held after the Second World War in Groningen in the Netherlands, and it was won by the future world champion Michael Botvinnik. In one of the rounds, Eric Lundin played Vasily Smyslov, also a future world champion, and I'll show you the game and the remarkable finish. Lundin played d4, Smyslov d5, knight f3, knight f6, e3, c5, bishop e2, g6, and Lundin castled. He's delaying c2, c4, so we are in an opening that's called the queen's pawn opening. Bishop g7, Lundin took on c5, queen a5, and a3, threatening to play b2, b4, which would keep the extra pawn. Hanging on to the pawn now without a2, a3 is not a very good idea. Queen d4 is the only move really to protect that pawn, but you don't want to go into that bishop diagonal. On top of that, the queen can also be kicked after knight c6. So that's not a human way of playing. a3 makes sense, and Smyslov took back the pawn. b4, queen c7, bishop e2, black castled, and knight bd2, preparing the c2, c4 move. Bishop g4, and here comes that c-pawn. Smyslov took it, and Lundin took back with the knight. And now Smyslov decided to take on f3, because he saw that the bishop is protecting the knight on c4. So after bishop takes f3, white cannot take back with the bishop, because then the knight is unprotected. Well, actually he could. After bishop takes f3, Smyslov could have taken back with the bishop. He didn't, but he could have, because after queen takes c4, there is bishop takes b7, winning the rook in the corner. Let's continue the variation. Knight bd7. Now you have to take the rook. Rook takes a8 back. Rook c1 hitting the queen. And for example, queen e6. Black has two knights for rook and pawn, and it's about equal. But Lundin did not want to play that, or did not see it. And he played g takes f3, so that the bishop keeps protecting the knight on c4. Rook d8, hitting the queen, queen b3, knight e8, rook ac1, knight c6, f4, the bishops were swapped, queen takes back, and rook ac8. Bishop f3, moving the bishop to a nicer diagonal, a6, and Lundin played knight a5, putting a lot of pressure on the knight on c6. The c6 knight is pinned, and now knight, rook, and bishop are attacking that knight. Queen d7 unpinning the knight, and now white decides to weaken black's pawn structure on the queen side. Knight takes c6, and you have to take back with the pawn to not lose material. Rook fd1, knight d6, queen e5, f6 hitting the queen, queen c5, and black played king h8, preparing a kingside attack and already vacating the g8 square for a rook. Queen b6 from Lundin, attacking the a6 pawn, and there comes Smyslov with his kingside attack, starting with g5, f takes g5, and you don't want to take that pawn back with your pawn because you want the g file to be open to attack the somewhat weakened king. So queen f5, and here the bishop is attacked, and Lundin played bishop g2, give the king some protection. The computer has no fear and just takes on c6. Let me show you. Bishop takes c6, queen takes g5 check, king f1, rook g8, king e2, and the computer says black's attack is not that dangerous, white is better here. But bishop g2 again is a more human way to play. Queen takes g5, and f4, which is not a great move. It weakens the white protection, the protection of the white king. Again, the engine thinks white can fearlessly take a pawn. Instead of f2, f4, it just takes on a6. And let me show you a variation. Rook g8, threatening, checkmate. Queen f1, back in the defense. And for example, knight f5, bringing all the pieces into the attack. But simply, king h1 does a trick. For example, knight h4, and then rook takes. You have to take back, and bishop takes. Here, black's attack is contained, and white's queenside pawns will decide in the long run. But as said, Lundin decided to play the pawn to f4. Queen g4. Rook d2, giving some protection over the second rank. Rook g8 as planned. Planned a long time ago when the king went to h8. Now Lundin took on a6, winning a pawn. Knight e4, bringing another piece into the attack. Hitting the rook, so rook dc2. And rook c d8. And now there's a threat of rook d1, which cannot be taken because of queen takes d1 and it's checkmate. The knight takes the f2 square away. And the bishop is pinned. Queen e2 brings the queen back in defense and hope to swap queens. White hopes to survive the attack, after which he'll be having winning chances with the a-pawn. Of course, black does not want to swap queens here. He wants to keep attacking. So queen h3 from Smyslov, with the threat of rook takes g2 check. Let me show you why that is a threat. If white starts running with the a-pawn, for example, just to make a move, a4, then there is rook takes g2 check. And if you take that, and you have no choice, then there's rook g8, pinning the queen and winning the queen. So that is a threat, and Lundin saw that and played queen e1. Queen f3 from Smyslov. Black has now full compensation for the pawn. He lost on a6. And white played a very unfortunate move, played king h1, which is a very unfortunate square for the king, as we will see. What he should have played, he should have played rook b1 to b2. Doubling on the second rank is the right defensive setup for white. And then hoping he would survive the black attack, and then he has great winning chances with his queenside pawns. But king h1 makes a combination possible, and Smyslov played it. Rook takes g2, and you have to take that rook, and then rook d2. And now we see why the king is so unfortunate on h1, because the rook on g2 is now pinned. With the king on g1, the rook on d2 would just be taken by the rook on g2. But now that's not possible, and now black has a winning attack. Queen f1, there's nothing better. And here comes the knight. Knight f2 check, king g1, and knight h3. King h1 is the only legal move. And now Smyslov could have won and should have won with a pretty simple rook f2. That decides the game. It's hitting the queen, and you have to give the queen, you have to take on f2, after which you just lose material. Because if you flee with the queen to e1, for example, there is queen takes g2, checkmate. And if you give the queen, the knight takes, king g1. Just to show you a variation, queen takes e3. And you cannot take on c6 because of queen e1 checkmate. So you have to do something like rook f1, knight h3, king h1, and after queen e4, black is completely winning. His material up, but also his pieces are a lot better positioned. The computer is already at -8. But Smyslov did not play rook f2, so let's go back to the position after king h1, where rook f2 is a pretty simple win. The queen has to give up the protection of the g2 square. Smyslov didn't see it. He played knight f2 check, king g1, knight h3, king h1, and knight f2 check. And a draw was agreed. Smyslov didn't see the winning move and chose to give a perpetual check. Smyslov was embarrassed when people showed him the simple win after the game. And he was even more embarrassed when he heard about this game. This position is after 26, queen c8 to f8 in the game Mikhail Chigorin against Akiba Rubinstein, played in Lodz in Poland in 1906, so 40 years before the Lundin-Smyslov game. If we look at the top right hand corner, we see exactly the same construction as in the Lundin-Smyslov game. If here Chigorin would have played knight f7 check, king g8, knight h6, king h8 and knight f7 check, then we would have had the same finish as in the Lundin-Smyslov game. But Chigorin saw the win. He played rook f7 and Rubinstein resigned here. It's the same construction as in Lundin-Smyslov. The queen has to sacrifice itself to stop checkmate. It cannot go to e8 because of queen takes g7, checkmate. Exactly the same construction. Chigorin had seen it 40 years later. Smyslov had not. So let's go back to the start of the video. Were the old masters stronger than their successors? Well, the discussion in 1946, a lot of people said yes, and they gave these two games as proof that the old masters played better than the masters of 1946. So was Steiny stronger than Carlsen? Was Chigorin stronger than Smyslov? You tell me. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give the thumbs up. Please subscribe, and I'm looking forward to your comments, especially on this topic. Did the old masters play better than the masters of nowadays? This is Rick from Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.